So what we are going to be doing, starting just now, is to start the event with an introduction by Dr. Enrico Calandro. He's going to tell you a little bit about CTSA, the work we do, and a bit about this event and the speakers. Then I will do a small background type of introduction, and then we will have the first question to our panelists, and every one of them will have 10 minutes to elaborate on a particular topic. And after that, we will take some questions from everybody who came to listen. And then Prof. Wallace Shigona will be closing the event. So basically, that's how simple, easy it's going to be. So without waiting any longer, I think I'm going to invite Dr. Calandro to introduce this third webinar for 2021, a webinar by CTSA. It's up to you, Dr. Calandro. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Laban. And good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third webinar organized by the Cybersecurity Capacity Center for Southern Africa at the University of Cape Town. My name is Enrico Calandro, and I am a co-director of C3SA. The title of today's webinar is Identifying Cyber Threats and Risks in Sub-Saharan Africa. So, as you are all aware, internet access and use comes with many opportunities as well as many threats and dangers. And often members of the public have challenges to identify what these threats and risks are and what dangerous situations might be while they use the internet online. The threats can affect personal, professional, and socio-cultural life, and then they can harm individuals from many points of view. They can harm their reputation, their wealth, professional career, investment, and so on and so forth. So the aim of this webinar is to explain and describe what these emerging threats and risks to lives of individual members of the public are while they use internet and other digital technologies. And with our speakers, we'd also suggest way to somehow to defend how we can defend ourselves from these risks and threats. We have this morning 4 wonderful speakers. They will be making short presentations on different thematic topics of the webinar. So they will be discussing 4 main questions. The first one is, what are the main cyber threats to general members of the public in Sub-Saharan Africa? The second question is, what are the main cyber threats to businesses in Sub-Saharan Africa? And the third question is, what is the state of cyber surveillance, cyber espionage, cyber terrorism, and cyber warfare in Sub-Saharan Africa? And fourth, what are the most frequent cyber crimes and their impacts on Sub-Saharan African people, economies, and countries? The presentation will be followed by a Q&A and discussion with participants, when you can all interact with them. And then we will conclude and wrap up the webinar. So without any further ado, I would give the microphone back to our senior researcher, Dr. Laban Bagui, who will moderate this webinar. And yeah, I hope you will all enjoy, you will all learn with us, and I look forward to an interesting webinar. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Calandro. So I'm going to try to share my screen so that we will have just a small background of what we are talking about. So I'm having some, how do you call them, PowerPoint challenges. Okay, it's supposed to work now. Oof. Okay, it seems to be working. So please let me know if you can see my screen.
Yes, we can.
All right, then that works. So good morning. The discussion we are going to have is simply basically trying to look at the kind of things that are usually happening to us every time we go online. And there are a certain number of things that we might not want to have happening to us. First, I think Dr. Calandro spoke about the CTSA. So I'm not going to be talking much about the CTSA. I'm just going to jump into this slide that talks a little bit about one very interesting thing that is happening, which is what are the cyber crimes that are taking place? It seems you are not seeing. All right, let me see. That's the other thing, is that I'm not exactly sure what you are seeing.
You're seeing presenter mode, not full screen.
Okay. I will start again with that. It's a presenter mode. That was a very unfortunate thing. Okay, I suppose it should be visible again now. Can you see the slide?
Just click on display settings on the top there. Display settings, more to the left.
Oh.
On the top, in the middle, top left. Display settings.
Okay.
Move your mouse left. Up, display settings. Swap.
Does it show now?
It's perfect.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Right, sure. That's PowerPoint challenge. Doesn't work the way you would like it sometimes. But yeah, so let's get back to it. So what I was saying, that cyber crimes and all the cyber threats that we are having to be exposed to online are starting to cost a lot of money to our countries, our economies, and to us, especially when you see that someone is swindling money out of you. Then you start understanding that things are happening that you don't want to see happening. So there is that last year report by Interpol, which was highlighting that a lot of things are happening, especially having drugs going through the internet and through Africa, and having human trafficking exploding, and all kinds of strange things, and all of it having a strong standing online. So they were already trying to ring the bell so that everybody will start looking at these things, because they are happening and they are causing terrible things to families and to people around the continent. So there are basic things to keep in mind, is that as a person using the internet, you are a data subject. So basically, whatever that you do online, produce, or is basically data that you are busy producing, and someone is busy copying it, or let's say keeping it somewhere, storing it, or looking at it, or using it for other purposes. But these things are happening. And you have to be aware at all times that your data is being, let's say, exploited, if I may use that word that way. So to get back to the main idea that we are supposed to be, that we are going to be talking about, when it comes to people, and you ask them about the threats, then we definitely point immediately to the malware, your usual virus, something that make things appear on your screen, other things disappear. Usually other things disappear. I think that was one of the very interesting virus that used to make things disappear in your folders. So, or you have lots of same things happening. Let's say you have one particular document and now every document is that document. Viruses are very interesting in the kind of things they do. They can be fun, but of course, if the intent behind them is not just fun, then they can become very problematic. We have the particular explosion of adwares. So everybody's doing some advertisement, and you might not ask for it, and there is a pop-up, there is a message, there is an email, there is something just trying to sell something to you, and that's very, very, very irritating. So for most of us, we try, let's say, maybe you can stay away, or you just try to, let's say, you block it in your mind and you say, okay, every time you show up, I will just, but that is not supposed to be the case. You are not supposed to be, let's say, accepting these kind of things to be happening. Then you have your hacks, your various hacks, someone gets into your phone and is able to do things on your phone without you giving any access or any authorization to that person to do that. The zero click is apparently something that is happening, that someone you never met decides that today he or she will be in your computer or in your phone and doing things. Lots of things are happening. And sometimes you want to get to your favorite governmental website to do a declaration, maybe pay tax, or I don't know what you want to do over there. And yeah, the website is not available. Someone is preventing people from accessing the government services. It happens to, of course, commercial platforms as well. So it comes and can become very problematic, especially if the real company was expecting, let's say, a particular sale and suddenly nobody's showing up. So you also have the usual scourge of misinformation, people telling stories which do not make sense, which do not exist to other people about things. I'm not getting into what happened with the COVID-19 pandemic and how it became, let's say someone was calling it infodemic, and was another problem besides the disease. We have our usual, the fraudsters. They are always around there trying to get something out of you. They can impersonate, they can use your details to access resources, your resources in places you go or people you deal with. And you have the very dangerous human traffickers who are basically luring youngsters, sometimes older people, into giving them their resources, but they are working online, or they get them to get into all kinds of slavery rings, maybe going to Europe or other places, usually going to Europe recently. And of course, the drug muling, I won't call it an industry, but the way it works, they attract people, they get them in and they put things in them and then they send them all over in order to keep their business going. But they manage to do that online. There are plenty of things that are happening for people that people need to be very, very wary of. So I'm going to try to be very quick here. When it comes to a business, of course, you don't want to be monitored by either the authorities or your competitors, but because you are online, they are online, well, the temptation must be very, very high for them to try to get in there and to try to, let's say, learn more, especially learn about your weaknesses, so that they will be able to do dangerous things to you. So you have your terrorists who are also getting in there. And for a business, they will make sure that a few things will be happening. For instance, you might try to make payments, and then they will, let's say, escalate that throughout, let's say, the critical infrastructure. Making sure that for a particular country, having access to a particular service would be almost impossible for the population. There were a few international events which happened, which might have been called terrorist activities. If it wasn't for, I just don't want to be naming specific things at this point, because our speakers will take us through all of that. There are dangers for cyber warfare, and of course, once you get into trouble, you start having issues with your reputation. If you're a country, you might get international sanctions and lose some of your sovereignty. I'm just going to move a bit faster so that we will have more time for our panelists to elaborate on every one of the subjects. Dr. Nurse is going to try to answer this very simple, I'm not sure I should say simple, this is a very interesting question about the main cyber threats to the general members of the public. And within also the context, like I say, also very importantly, also the context of Sub-Saharan Africa, and how these threats could be seen, let's say, once they're seen, identified, and somehow how to go around those. Then Rensil is going to tell us more about, well, what could happen to a business, especially when the business has to deal with remote work and deal with, let's say, very broad professional networks, because businesses online are no longer just geographically located in one place, and they have all kinds of interactions all over the world. And it is also happening in Africa. So we're also going to be having a very interesting chat about the state of these societal-wide type of activities, espionage, surveillance, terrorism, warfare, and how they tend to happen online. And finally, Angela is going to get us through, let's say, the most frequent cyber crimes and the impacts on people, economies, and society and countries. Just to introduce very quickly our presenters, our panelists. So you have Associate Professor Jason Nurse. Okay, I'm sure you can find most of that information on our website and on our social media. So I will quickly just read the first line so that we have a clear understanding of what is going on. So Dr. Nurse is a professor in cybersecurity at the Institute of Cybersecurity for Society at the University of Kent. He's also a visiting academic at the University of Oxford, visiting fellow in defense and security at Cranfield University, and associate fellow at the Royal United Services Institute for Defense and Security Studies. His research is all about investigating interdisciplinary approaches to enhance and maintain cyber security for organizations, individuals, and governments. He has published more than 100 peer-reviewed articles. I'm sure you have to go and read all of that because it's very, 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 very interesting things. I'm not sure I read all the 100, but I read a few. So I will definitely advise to go and have a look at those. So Ms. Rensil Kaimba is the head of product strategy and development accountable for technology and cybersecurity solutions portfolio across a diverse and multilingual East, West, and South African business unit. She has also worked with different stakeholders to design industry frameworks, including risk quantification frameworks and other cybersecurity solutions for African SMEs. She's the editor in chief of Africa's cybersecurity report, a continent-wide annual report that highlights key trends and cybersecurity posture of different industries across African countries. So we also have Ms. Elizabeth Wuraola, I hope I'm pronouncing it well, sorry, Kolade, who is a cybersecurity professional, a STEM advocate and all-round technology enthusiast. Area of expertise cuts across incident handling and response, ethical hacking, forensics, open source intelligence, and cyber diplomacy, amongst others. She has served as a cybersecurity analyst, a technical specialist, advisor, training instructor, and cyber drill facilitator, amongst other things. So Elizabeth is a fellow of the President Barack Obama initiated Young African Leaders Initiative. She was recognized as the African Woman of the Day in 2017 by MTV Ghana and as a fellow of the Aladbai Wima Bank Tech Chicks class of 2018. She will be talking about the cyber warfare. I'm sure we are going to have a very exciting discussion about that. So we also have Angela Matlapeng, who is a self-driven and versatile ICT professional with proven experience in state-of-the-art software development, country code, top-level domain administration, cybersecurity, internet policy development, and multi-stakeholder engagement. Angela is currently tenured as a CERT analyst at the Botswana Communications Sectorial CERT, housed at Bokra. She's also the vice chairperson of the Africa Top Level Domains Organization since 2020, where she was first appointed to the board of directors in 2019. Okay, I'm sure you can go and read every single part of these biographies. We have very excellent panelists, and we take us through very detailed and up-to-date issues in matters of cybersecurity threats and risks for Sub-Saharan African. They will do that and will allow us to learn more about how to identify the threats and how to see how to handle the risk when they come to us. So thank you very much for listening to that background. I was trying to make it short as possible, but it seems I did not manage very well. So without waiting any longer, let me introduce Dr. Nurse. Dr. Nurse, please, the floor is yours. So please take us through the many discussions about the threats that we are having when we are online. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you to C3SA for inviting me. Can I just check that you can hear me okay?
I hear you very well. I suppose everyone does.
Okay, perfect. And can I also check that you can see my screen in presentation mode and my slides?
Very, very good. I can see it.
Perfect. Okay, great. So thanks once again. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So thanks once again for everyone for attending. And you know, it's really an honor to be here to kind of give you a talk about some of my research and how it can actually apply to SSA. So what I'm going to be talking to you about this morning is the topic of cyber threats, especially looking at the threats facing the individual. And some of my research is very general, some of it focuses on the UK, but the point is that a number of the things that I'm going to talk about today that actually are international and actually apply to Sub-Saharan Africa as well. So the first thing I want to talk about a little bit is just the context that we're dealing with here. And the reality is that, you know, in 2016, I always remember this quote from the Telegraph in the UK, basically saying that, you know, you're 20 times more likely to be robbed while you're at your computer than actually to be held up, let's say, in the streets. And I think the reality here is back in 2016, highlighting how much of a significant threat online crime is. And online crime has been even back since those days or those years. If we kind of jump forward to, you know, to now, the reality is that cybercrime and kind of online attacks and cyber threats is so significant that, you know, if you have to look at it, it would actually be, you know, the third largest economy after the US and China in terms of the money being kind of exploited and gained. And once again, the reality here is that cybercrime, online threats, it's a massive business model. It has attracted a number of attackers over a long period of time, and it's constantly growing. And there's constantly this reality and this struggle for security professionals and even the public, some members like you and those in business, to try to combat these threats in effective ways. Because for some of them, they have large amounts of money. And it's really about how do you invest, how do you kind of set up yourselves to, if you're an individual, if you're a member of the public, if you are a business, to actually tackle the threat faced against you. So in my research, I really tried to look into this kind of this question of the main threats facing individuals and in particular. And I came up with these kind of five main types of the bit of research I did. So there's social engineering, there's online harassment, identity related threats, especially looking at online fraud. And then also hacking and denial of service and information attacks. So you should hopefully see these on screen. If you don't, please let me know. So today I just want to narrow and really focus on two of them because I only have a limited amount of time. I want to focus on social engineering and identity related threats because I think these are the two particularly significant threats actually facing us as a society today and as individuals today. Now, if we jump into social engineering, so many people might not have actually heard of social engineering before, but you might have heard, almost certainly have heard about phishing. And phishing is, it's an attack that's basically where an attacker pretends to be someone else, pretends to be someone your bank, your organization, and so on. And they basically use that to trick you, to convince you into sharing information that you shouldn't. So sharing your passwords, sharing or even transferring money to them, and so on. And one of the interesting stats here is, 95%, 91% of cyber attacks linked to phishing. And what we find is often that phishing is used as kind of almost a prerequisite to a number of other attacks. Could they be malware, viruses, or anything like that? So let's actually look into this in a bit more detail. So one of the things that I've noticed based on my research is that we often talk about phishing. We often talk about, oh, you need to prepare yourself for phishing. You need to look out for misspelled emails. You need to look out for things that look slightly suspicious. But what the reality is actually, well, what actually looks suspicious? How do you tell what looks suspicious beyond things like a misspelled email or things not being stated correctly? Because the reality is that a number of phishing emails these days don't succumb to the usual issues of bad spelling and misformatting and stuff like that. Some of them are actually very, very well crafted. So here on the screen, you see an example of an email claiming to be from Barclays and being sent to an individual. What I want to do right now is just take us through really briefly some of the key things you need to look at that the attackers try to exploit in how they craft emails. So the first thing is here you have kind of signs of legitimacy. So at the top, you see it being from email.barclays.co.uk for the Barclays UK context. Of course, this will be international as well. So immediately that starts to make a person think, oh, well, okay, that's a legitimate email. And then also you have this kind of alarming emotive message at the top. So this item will expire in 24 days, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So once again, there's from an attacker's perspective, they're trying to get you in a little bit more of a flustered manner. And then if we go on to the main body of the email, looking at the evidence. So it says here, for your security, we have temporarily suspended your account. Please download the document attached to this email and fill carefully. So it kind of tries to nudge you towards doing something, and it really tries to make you think this is for your safety. And then lastly, if you focus on the last one, do not ignore this message. It is for your safety. Once again, the attacker is basically trying to craft a message that highlights a number of things that makes it seem in your interest to do what they're suggesting that you should do. So the key thing is here to note that there's a number of these things that you should be picking up on when you're actually noticing that or trying to understand, is this a phishing email? Is this not? Here you can see constant nudges towards trying to get you to do something, trying to get you to do something quickly. And it's also trying to kind of be a bit more emotive and trying to get you alarmed. And the key thing about that is if you're in any of these situations, it makes you more likely to not make as rational a decision as you would typically make. And that was email, but phishing attacks can be on mobile phones. We see some here actually, especially around the COVID pandemic, where attackers are trying to actually trick individuals to do stuff that they wouldn't normally do. And on the left hand side, you see particularly looking at account suspension. On the right hand side, you see this attack that was actually where attackers basically sent SMSs, so text messages, to individuals basically saying urgent. The UK government, or the government has basically decided to issue a payment related to COVID. You just need to go here and enter your details, and this information will get transferred to you. So here, the attackers are trying to kind of exploit the nature of COVID and people being flustered, looking, some people being laid off, and trying to get that and try to exploit those factors in how they craft attacks. So these are the really things you need to look out for. In terms of summarizing that bit of work, what I did was also, you can see on screen, is a summary of kind of the key things that attackers use to try to kind of exploit in how they conduct attacks. So for example, they try to exploit when we are not paying attention. They try to exploit cognitive biases. They try to exploit our willingness to trust others, a willingness to be kind. They try to exploit things like our emergency or importance, and they try to get us almost flustered so that we're not making rational decisions that would actually help us identify when something is or is not a phishing or a social engineering attack. So these are the real things you need to look out for. Now, if we jump forward to kind of identity-related crimes now, because I think, like I said, these are the two big ones from my perspective, and I'm sure the other panel will cover some of the other ones that I'm mentioning here. So online fraud, massive, big money maker, and it's really focused around kind of getting people to hand over their hard-earned cash, hard-earned money. And here you see some stats on screen. But I think one of the realities I really want to delve into is this reality around, the angle I want to look at this from is around passwords. So of course, anyone could fall victim to a fraud attack. You could be sent information, you could be tricked into passing on money, funds, or anything, especially even linked to the social engineering attacks I mentioned before. But I think one of the biggest things where attackers are actually exploiting is the user's bad selection of passwords. And on screen, you see some stats from passwords over the years in terms of the top passwords exposed in data breaches. And here you see some very, very simple passwords. And I think what we see here is the tension of people trying to choose passwords that they remember, but also trying to choose passwords that are that allow them to access websites. And unfortunately, as we can see here, there's very much a kind of a focus on people choosing passwords that they can remember and not really choosing ones that are secure. And another thing to the right, actually highlighting the reality that people are choosing passwords based on hobbies, interests, and stuff like this. So you see a number of football teams, Liverpool, you see music artists, you see different, movies and so on. And the reality is, if you're choosing passwords based on these very simple things, if someone just looks you up on a Facebook, TikTok, whatever, then they can actually gain some understanding of what you like and then what things you might actually use as passwords. And that's why this point of informed guessing is a really, really big and significant threat. If we kind of jump forward from here, I want to highlight some of you might find this a bit hilarious. I find it quite worrying. So there's a feed called, and this kind of focuses really on the oversharing of people online. And here you have an example of a feed called Need a Debit Card. And what we see here is that people are actually posting their debit cards online, the front and the back of them. Of course, this is a really massive security threat. And then also based on the other articles you can see on screen, the reality that as we share more about ourselves online, as we share more about our backgrounds online, as we share more about what we're doing online, all of these things expose us to additional threats. I wrote an article for the Wall Street Journal called "The Dangerous Secrets of Working from Home Photos Revealed." And the reality here is that what I did in that work is actually show from a number of different images that people have behind them when they're doing video calls such as this, over the pandemic period. There's a lot of information that people are leaking about themselves, about their families, and so on, that attackers could actually use to craft better attacks. So for example, guess passwords, or craft more convincing phishing emails. So all these things are the points that we need to remember when we're thinking about how to protect ourselves online and how to keep secure online, whether you're an individual or actually whether you're a business. And then the last thing I wanted to mention really is, so we did a bit of work in the kind of height of the COVID pandemic. And what we were really interested in is understanding the extent to which criminals were almost piggybacking government announcements and realities with respect to lockdowns across the world, with respect to certain attacks emerging. And what we showed, as you can sort of see on screen now, I won't jump into great amounts of detail, was that attackers were constantly monitoring the messages being launched across different countries in the world. And what they were basically doing is customizing attacks, whether they be phishing, whether they be malware, according to what they were seeing. So let's say the government announced that there was going to be some support being offered. Then attackers almost the next day would announce a craft a phishing attack or craft a social engineering attack or craft a malware attack based around that announcement. And I think one of the really significant things about this from our perspective was that it showed how well informed attackers were, and the fact that attackers were constantly piggybacking on all the public messaging that was seen across the pandemic to craft their attacks. So that was the last slide for me. Thank you very much for listening. I went a little bit over, but hopefully that's not too much of a problem. And I look forward to any questions you have when the time comes. So thanks, Laban. And thanks everyone.
Thank you so much for that presentation, Dr. Nurse. I think we all need to know how to handle these things as they come to us. It gets very problematic to know that, okay, so I can't even stand here and just send emails and nobody's watching, or I can't really just read an email, or I cannot just go on this website and buy this thing because someone or something is trying to get at me. It's somehow frightening, but it's amazing that we can find ways of detecting these and managing to deal with them. So our next panelist, Brensil Kaimba, is going to tell us about the main cyber threats to businesses in Sub-Saharan Africa. Since Dr. Nurse was telling us about what we will individually, personally face every time we're online. So Brensil is going to tell us about, now that we have our small business and we are thinking, yes, we are going to be billionaires soon enough. Now, this is that ransomware, and suddenly I can't do anything anymore. Please, Brensil, it's up to you now. Thanks a lot.
Okay. Thank you so much, Laban. We all want to start that business and become millionaires. And yeah, so just allow me to share my screen. Hopefully I'll be able to go through this very fast. So
your screen is visible?
Okay. Thank you so much. So basically, when I was thinking about what to share for this particular session, what are businesses facing? What threats are businesses facing? So I felt let me just go back and look at what are some of the research findings that we have over the last couple of years in terms of attacks or threats that are facing businesses. So so some of this might not necessarily be attacks or like a real attack. It could just be a risk that you're facing as an organization. And the key theme for 2019, 2020 for a number of organizations was data protection, data privacy. When you look across East Africa, a lot of us were publishing a lot of data protection laws, even in the Southern African region. So by a matter of fact, data protection has become one of the key areas of focus for businesses. And it's not just because the laws have been passed, it's because actually the risk is that a lot of organizations don't fully understand the extent to which they are exposed. So we do have a law that we don't know what to do with. As organizations, we are collecting a lot of information. We are processing a lot of information and we don't know what to do with this. So this presents issues such as we've been facing issues of data loss, we've been facing issues of ransomware, but before there has never been really the consequence. What is the consequence? But now we are seeing that there are consequences that have been written down. Whether or not they'll be followed, that's a different matter. But that's one of the issues that I would say is a key risk that organizations in Africa are facing, and more so organizations that are operating in different African countries. So the other key theme, just from 2019 again, is ransomware, which ties into the data protection laws that we were talking about. Ransomware, again, this was a global percentage of 118%, that percentage increase. So there's an increase in ransomware attacks that's targeting specific organizations, and you're asked to pay money in Bitcoin or you lose all your data. So we've seen an increase in that over like in 2019. In 2019, if you were very keen and you're in the banking sector, what you'd realize is that there was a lot of targeted attacks towards ATM machines. And for those of you who have access to the dark web, there were quite a number of variants of ATM malwares that were being sold across the dark web. So again, there was that increase in ATMs being targeted. I think maybe it's just because that was a very new area, especially in Africa, for attackers to target, because previously what we've been seeing is that attackers manually go in to attack a machine, physically attack a machine. But now we are seeing attackers using malware to attack ATM machines. So if you're in the financial sector, that's an area that you should think about. And then just across the region, we also saw between 2019 and 2020, a lot of coordination of attacks. So basically what this means is that from where I sit, so I sit in a command center that serves clients in different countries. So you're able to see an attack in, let's say, Botswana, and you see the same characteristics of attacks in Uganda and Kenya. But a lot of them were seen within East Africa. So the same characteristics of attacks, you see them within East Africa, probably the same kind of players, perpetrators for the same attacks within the same region. So they start with one, they move to the next, the same tactics that they employ on one, they employ on the other. And then, of course, we've talked about data protection. So just in terms of, if I can summarize the threats that organizations face from 2019, 2020, there was infrastructure problems with ATMs, if you're in the financial sector, mobile banking infrastructure attacks, and this, I will say, particularly for Eastern Africa, where we really adopted mobile banking. And then there's debit and credit card system manipulation. And here you'd see that it's mainly a lot when you look at West African countries as opposed to East African countries for this. Third parties and vendor compromise, identity management, compromise, things like your internal infrastructure that you use to authenticate. So these are some of the things that we've seen that are causing a lot of havoc for organizations. And these are just areas that you can look at to ensure that you've secured that particular infrastructure. And if you're coming from manufacturing, insurance, healthcare, or government, payment systems are some of the things that you should be looking at. I know we've designed a lot of automated payment systems that are linked to either your banks, your insurance companies. So there's been a lot of attack around those payment systems, document management systems. So a lot of, I'll say, manufacturing and government, you have a lot of document management systems where you're storing documents and files. So one of the key attack vectors has been ransomware, where you're attacked by ransomware and all your data is actually encrypted. There's also just data leakage, where people say that people steal your data and publish it online. So those have been some of the greatest threats for those specific industries. I know I've mentioned malware, email systems being compromised, but this cuts across not just for manufacturing, insurance, healthcare, or government, but even banking. We've seen a lot of attacks leveraging on email systems. And just to give you a pictorial view of where we are as Africa, or just what types of attacks should you expect from different areas. Not that these are the only attacks, but these are the most prevalent according to our research, basically. So we did analyze a couple of institutions, banks actually, and for this specific case, we identified that in the Western Africa region, particularly those in the French-speaking countries, there's a lot of SIM swap and card fraud, just because unlike the rest of the African parts, they've not moved to the chip. There's still magnetic strip usage when you look at cards. There's also a lot of social engineering which cuts across the rest of Africa, but card fraud and SIM swap fraud have been the biggest when you look at the ones that stands out. When you look at East Africa, again, the one that stands out is mobile money. Why? Because we've adopted mobile money. There are a lot of integration issues. And for Uganda specifically, when you look at the cost, how much was reported to the police, it's about 3 million USD. This is a lot of money. So this just tells you, when you're operating in different countries or in different countries, yes, across Africa, what type of threats you should be expecting from the different ecosystems and as an organization as such. I touched on mobile money security, and just to give you an in-depth look at it, we are looking at organizations. So this is a very unique combination of mobile providers, telcos, and banks. So having that integration, and that is now what we are seeing a lot of transaction manipulation. We are seeing a lot of database manipulation. We are seeing a lot of encryption compromise. So these are some of the security concerns that are around the financial bank, especially if you're delivering online transactions or if you're delivering mobile transactions. Just again to highlight in terms of threats businesses should be worried about, the face of cybercrime has changed. So you're no longer looking at some Chinese or white person seated somewhere. This is the face of the people that are attacking you. What I mean is that insiders, basically, people who look like you and I, are the people who are actually compromising. Some are even younger than what you'd expect. And it's now regionally coordinated. So instead of worrying about just one person, that insider who is sitting in the organization, you now have to worry about a bigger group of people who might compromise your organization. The last part I'll just like to touch on, and this was also indicated in the document, is that the type of risks that we should focus on, and this was brought about with the COVID. With COVID, we moved online, and by moving online, we started working remotely. And there were a number of threats that we were exposed to. So the first one is we've seen an increase in phishing attacks, so fake emails, and I'm glad Dr. Nas has talked about that. We've also seen an increase in remote access errors and configurations, which helps attackers to compromise people. We've also seen a lot of malware distribution, so this is something you should be worried about. We've also seen risks as a result of reduced monitoring because you're working from home, you're not really monitoring the enterprise as much. And then exploitation of teleworking infrastructure, such as the one we are using right now, basically someone getting into your meetings and you don't know who they are. So those are just some of the risks that the businesses are facing as a result of what's happening in the world right now. This is a visual representation of, in terms of just countries, what it looks like in terms of vulnerable connections. We have Nigeria, we have Kenya as the top, and then Botswana, Uganda, but the list goes on, just to show you that as a result of COVID, as a result of working from home, we have exposed ourselves to a number of threats. Yes, Laban, I can see you're back on, so hopefully I have not taken too much time. So yeah, thank you. So those are that's just a summary of the threats that you can encounter as a business.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Bentil, for this very, now I'm a bit afraid. You know, I have a new business, and these things you are saying now, I'm not sure. I was hoping that maybe next year I will think about those cybersecurity things. Yeah, but yeah, it's getting more and more difficult out there to see that the story we were hearing about the threats to businesses, they are no longer stories. They are here, and they are performed by our fellows just around the corner, and they are also targeting us. The next topic which we are going to engage on is about some of the most exciting, not exciting, it depends. If you're a researcher, you might be very, very, very excited. As a person, let's say, undergoing these things as they are taking place, it's not that exciting. So countries happen to start getting, let's say, stronger and stronger online. So you have e-government services getting everywhere, critical infrastructure offering services online and attracting all kinds of things. So what happens there is we have allegations of, let's say, people who are not supposed to look into our affairs, but now they are just doing that. We have allegations of people trying to scare everybody from their own homes and other places. And of course, we have allegations of countries thinking, okay, maybe military will not be that an easy option. Let's go online and just, you know, quiet the opponents from there. So Elizabeth Kolade is going to get us into these state of affairs and elaborate more, because I don't have the words. I think she knows so much more about that, and she will definitely help us with that. Elizabeth, it's up to you now. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Laban. Confirming that you can hear me loud and clear. Can you hear me?
Yes, Elizabeth.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, C3SA, for having me. I'll try my very best to do this in the time allotted to me. So I've been asked to speak on the state of cyber surveillance, espionage, terrorism, and cyber warfare in Sub-Saharan Africa. So far, we have listened to how these cyber threats affect us as individuals and also as businesses. And I think it's also important that we also have this conversation on how it affects our collective identity as states and countries. First, to do a little scene setting and ensure we are all on the same page. What is cyberterrorism? Basically refers to the politically motivated use of computers and information technology to cause disruption or fear in a society. To espionage, which Laban mentioned earlier on, it speaks to the use of computer networks to gain illicit access to confidential information, typically held by a government or other organization. Cyber warfare, the cyber domain is now referred to as the fifth domain of warfare beyond what we are used to, land, air, sea, and space. It is basically the use of computer technology to disrupt activities of a state or organization, especially the deliberate attacking of information systems for strategic military purposes. And the big elephant in the room, cyber surveillance, basically an electronic system used for surveillance of online activities, processes operated from and on the internet. Now, I would like to speak to some of related activities that we have seen over the past few years in Sub-Saharan Africa. Now, talking about terrorist activities, we have seen how some terrorist groups have taken advantage of the internet and connected and basically use it to propagate their agenda. First, we have the Al-Shabaab in Eastern Africa. We have seen reports on how this group uses the internet to carry out propaganda. Sometime as far back in 2015, 2016, about 126 Twitter accounts were identified to be used by this group to disseminate information, propaganda. And one way or the other, as much as this did not directly hit critical infrastructure, it was doing something on the people. They were driving an agenda and influencing the psychology and mindsets of the people. Also, 13 websites were identified to be used to spread information about this particular terrorist organization. Now, while these websites were publicly known to be operated by this terrorist group, they were cited as credible sources of information. So we can imagine how strong of a statement that was. And also the use of cyberspace in carrying out recruitment exercises. I think it was Brent Silver mentioned how the use of cyberspace makes the information spread widely. You would be more likely to be attacked or approached over the internet than you would see someone come meet you in person with something like a recruitment for asking to join a terrorist group or something like that. Also coming to Nigeria, we have the Boko Haram terrorist group operating similarly like the Al-Shabaab, use of the cyberspace to carry out propaganda, carry out recruitment exercises, also operating closed social media channels such as Telegram. Because with the Al-Shabaab, we have seen how Twitter has helped in bringing down some of these identified Twitter accounts, and also web hosting services have helped in bringing down some of these websites. So a group like the Boko Haram has moved into operating closed social media channel groups. Also looking at activities of the activist group known as Anonymous. Sometime back in 2018, this group took over the Twitter account of the Kenyan Defense Forces and carried a number of website defacements. Also in Nigeria in 2020, during the EndSARS protest in October 2020, we witnessed a number of Twitter account takeover of government government social media accounts, and also defacement of a number of government websites. Now speaking briefly on cyber espionage, something we are all very familiar with. The diplomacy attempts by the Chinese governments to the African Union. We're all aware of the incidents where servers at the AU headquarters were found to be transmitting information to a location somewhere in Shanghai. It was believed that walls and furnitures were bugged and were transmitting information to somewhere in Shanghai. Now, this raises a question of trust between the Chinese government and the African Union. And so far, I think this is one of the biggest cyber espionage incidents that we have witnessed as a region, although we have quite a number. Moving on to another cyber espionage event. This happened not too long ago. A new APT group was found to be attacking diplomats in Africa and the Middle East. A number of African countries were identified. This was revealed in a conference by ESETs, where the primary targets were identified to be Ministry of Foreign Affairs departments, telecommunication companies. Basically, this attack exploited vulnerable internet exposed applications on web servers, and it was found that information was being exfiltrated from the target device to an unknown source. Now, not too long ago, in June 2020, which was last year, I would call this a water war, which became a cyber war between Egypt and Ethiopia. This was an incident where there was some sort of conflict with respect to the Nile Dam, and a group known as the Cyber Horus Group, which is we can refer to as an hacktivist group, basically hacked more than a dozen Ethiopian government websites and replaced each page with their own, basically carried out a website defacement. Now, while these actions may or may not have been state actions, at the core of this incident, this online hacks, these attacks, is what we would call nationalism. So we cannot exactly eliminate the collective identity of the state in this. Now, looking at this particular incident also raises the question of how ready we are, how ready governments of various states within the Sub-Saharan Africa are prepared to counter cyber-terrorism attempts. Because if we look at what we have seen so far, basically going from social media to website defacement, one would argue that one of the reasons why we have experienced more of this is because most of our critical infrastructure, as at that time, was not exactly dependent on networked and internet devices. Now, looking at where we are right now and where we are heading, how well prepared are we to counter these attempts with a number of terrorism groups building capacity, building international collaboration and coordination. In a not so distant past, I'm talking about migration to critical infrastructure. Let's take a look at attack to critical infrastructure. This happened not too long ago, how cyber attacks disrupted major port operations in South Africa. Excuse me. So this basically disrupted activities, had a lot of cargo ships that were unable to be unfolded. And one way or the other, this affected this had an economic impact on the state. The organization that was attacked was a state-owned company. So this is just one incident out of so many. In a statement released by Cape Town Harbours Carriers Association, it stated that the public should please note that the port operating system have been cyber attacked and there will be no movement of cargo until the system is restored. This took a number of days before the systems were able to be brought back online. Now to the biggest elephant in the room, which is cyber surveillance. So a report by the University of Toronto's Citizen Lab brought out a report identifying 25 governments to be using a particular surveillance solutions by an Israeli company called Sapos. Now, of these 25 governments, 7 were identified to be within the African region. Of these 7, 2 were identified in Nigeria, 1 by a government intelligence agency, and 1 by individuals, political individuals, gubernatorial candidates that were basically using this solution to spy on their opponents. In Zimbabwe, 3 of these solutions, of this 3 incidents of the use of this particular surveillance solution was identified as far back in 2013, same for Equatorial Guinea, Morocco, Botswana, Zambia, and Kenya. Now, the organization behind these 2 is known to have some sort of affiliation with the NSO group that brought about the Pegasus spyware, which was widely used to spy on human rights defenders and journalists a while ago. This also begs the question of the accessibility of this kind of solutions within the Nigerian markets. We need to talk about the need for regulation. How do we allow these solutions to be used within our space? Now, in conclusion, I would just like to draw up some of the points I raised. In conclusion, and in talking about a way forward, we have seen how some of these terrorist organizations, so to say, are making use of coordination and collaboration to build their capacity. For example, the Al-Shabaab have some sort of international backing. So I think it's important for us to come together, put our coordination efforts together, collaborate, identify these threats as a region, how it affects us, and see how we can address this, because these threat actors are daily enhancing, collaborating, and building their capacity to commit the incidents. Also, there's need to develop capacity. I know we always talk about the need to build capacity, but we can never stop talking about it. I don't think we can, capacity is never too much. Now, when talking about capacity, yes, there's need for us to develop technical capacity to protect these critical infrastructures. Like Dr. Noss and Bressil rightly mentioned earlier on, addressing the threats to individuals and businesses, we can see how actions by individuals will, one way or the other, aid some incidents or threats attempts to states. So there is need for us to develop technical capacity and also non-technical capacity. I'm happy to see quite a number of people on this call today who have been involved in conversations in the area of international peace and security in cyberspace, and in the non-technical aspects, so to say, talking about multilateral organizations, policy levels, and the like. So there's need for us to develop, to build capacity in these areas. The need to develop indigenous solutions. For example, take a look at the incident at the AU headquarters. There's need for us to develop our in-house capacity here within Africa. Come up with that incident led to the AU purchasing its own servers and then declining requests to configure by the Chinese government. Now, if we had some level of capacity, some level of sophisticated capacity at that point in time, we probably would have suffered an incident like that. Also, on the question to cyber espionage, now, while a number of government organizations are purchasing solutions from Israeli companies, so to say, what level of control they are only customers to these vendors, so to say. How much more information are we willingly giving to these other countries and international organizations? So there is need for us to develop indigenous solutions, as much as law enforcement might have need to carry out some sort of surveillance, not stepping on human rights and all of that. There's need for us to build our own indigenous capacity and indigenous solutions. And I see Laban is here, so I'm just going to hold my peace at this point. And I hope we have some more time to discuss this during the interactive session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth, for that very, very insightful presentation. I'm kind of weary now. Maybe I shouldn't be online at all. There have been all kinds of things, all kinds of entities. They are all busy trying to get on my data. And maybe tomorrow morning, my nationality might just change because something might have happened. Let's just branch out and look at how broadly these things can get to us. So our next panelist, Angela is going to try to wrap up a little bit of what we were talking about, and show us which one of these, let's say, threats and the crimes which are attached to them are most prevalent in Sub-Saharan Africa, and how they impact our economies, how they impact our social life, and how they impact us individually. I'm sure she will be able to get us to these very specific things. So, Angela, it's up to you now. Thanks.
Thank you, Laban, for the introductions, and good time of the day, everyone, from wherever you're joining us today. And thank you for being part of this webinar. So it's also an honor and a pleasure to be amongst really knowledgeable and established panels, as they've clearly alluded into the different cyber crimes here in Africa. So I'm not sure if I'm just going to share my screen right now. Please let me know if you see it on your end. Is it visible now?
I can see it.
Perfect. So yeah, the different panelists have already given you the statistics of the general risks and threats that are here in the SSA region. So I'm not really going to dwell much on those. I will just maybe touch the why part of why we have these frequent threats, as well as dwell more on the impacts and just a little bit of what we can do to sort of curb cyber crimes here in the SSA region. Okay. All right, so ranking top of the list of the different cyber threats is business email compromise. I think that Dr. Ness did some good justice on this one. So basically with business email compromise, we have attacks that are launched through social engineering tactics, which he spoke to. You have your spamming and your phishing, and one that hasn't been mentioned is the attachment of malicious documents. So in essence, when you download that document, you're actually downloading an executable file that will then just take over your machine if that's the intent of the hacker. And then we also have these attacks being very prominent because of lack of email security. So just to speak on two of the main email security policies that you should be having in place would be your SPF, which just basically means are the servers that are sending emails on behalf of your organizations really the ones that you are supposed to be using, or is there someone sitting in the middle pretending to be your organization and sending out email? And then you have your DKIM, which just looks into the integrity part of the email itself. So to say, are you sending messages or emails that are not tampered with, on transit? So for the second attack, we've got your botnet coordinated attacks, and this is where you find a lot of user behavior. So we know a lot of people like to go online and download your different movies or books or audio files that are free. I'm putting that in quotes because, well, from what we've seen, botnets do come through these files or visiting those different unsolicited websites. So what would happen is, as you download that movie or song, it comes with your malware dropper, which would just sit in the background of your computer without you even knowing. So what would happen is the different bots or those computers that are now affected will become a network that's controlled from a central point or command point, and they're used to even attack other networks. So you might be sitting here and thinking, well, I'm not a target of cybercrime. Why would a hacker be interested in me? The question is, what kind of resources do you have that a hacker can use? So if you've got massive processing power or the likes, you would be part of this botnet where now your CPU or your storage is being used to do activities like your crypto mining, where we know that you'd need more processing power to be mining those or calculating those different mathematical functions that are there in cryptology. So we also have ransomware. I think if you've seen in the news, there was a recent attack in South Africa where I think it was the Ministry of Justice. They were held at ransom. And I wouldn't know if the ransom was paid, but most of the companies would actually pay for ransom. Think of a hospital, for instance, if all the patient information is online and all that information is being encrypted, as well as the backup, because sometimes they even go beyond the systems themselves. They will even encrypt your backup. So if you don't have an alternative or a way out of this ransomware, then you'd have to pay the attackers. And usually that ask for Bitcoins or the equivalent of whatever money they're looking for. So we have identity theft, which again, Dr. Ness spoke to. But here we also have your petty mobile theft. So you'd find someone pretending to be maybe an e-wallet account holder and say, listen, I've sent you such and such amount to your e-wallet mobile. Could you please return the money or maybe keep like 100 pula to yourself just to say sorry for the travel costs? And a lot of people fall for these it's called vishing, where you use your voice over the phone to convince people into sharing that different information. We also have fake news, which is really affecting the region. For instance, right now, the world is divided into two. We've got people who don't want to take the vaccine and those who want to take the vaccine. And at the center of it all is fake news. We don't know what is what. And most people wouldn't even bother with going to the extensive research and reading if it's true. They act out of fear and would, take decisions based on what's there out online or what's circulating, especially on social media platforms. There's a lot of fake news that's ongoing there. We also have your cyberbullying, which could also include your cyber stalking, grooming, and the like. So this affects both the young people, mostly the young people, but as well as the adults. And surprisingly, you'd find that these games that youngsters are into is where the whole cyberbullying would happen. So in the chat part of the games would be someone you're connected to on the online games, and that'd be saying all these hate speeches and maybe body shaming you, you can name it. I want to believe we have heard about the recent case. I think it was hashtag Justice for Lufuno in South Africa, where a very young girl ended up committing suicide because she wasn't only physically bullied, she was then also bullied online, where the video that was taken when she was being bullied was also uploaded online, and it ended up in a very heartbreaking instance of death. So one very common other attack is website defacement. So this is where the attacker would just basically take over your website and put information that's in no case related to the content that you're serving or the services. And this damages reputation because everyone who's going to come to the website would see something that's not related to your website, and they wouldn't trust that site anymore. And for defacements, you could check a site. It's called Zone 8. It's a free tool online. You're able to log into there and see the different kinds of domains and websites that have been defaced. They will also show you a file path to see where the web shell is or where the new content is located within the website. So it's quite helpful. Moving on to the impacts of the cybercrime. First and foremost, we would record monetary losses as the common denominator of all cybercrime. So whether it's for people, the economy, or the nation at large, or the country, there are always monetary losses associated to cybercrime. It could be through investing in technology or tools that would help you identify your threat landscape or even prevent cybercrime, or it could be through the cybercrime itself. If someone is going to use your credit card information, as we had earlier on, and buy stuff online pretending to be you, then it means that's money moving out of your account. Additional to that, we have a toll on mental health as an impact to people. So you will be left in distress, no doubt, and some even go to an end of depression. And based on the way cybercrime has affected you, you could be ashamed to talk about the issue, or if you are doxed. Doxing is when information is put about you online. So if there's that kind of information, you are shameful to even mention that that has happened to you. It can lead to that depression and anxiety. And I've just given an example where there was loss of life, loss of data and privacy as well. That one is always the case, especially if you have been phished, your data will be exposed. And there's been a lot of data breaches that have been recorded in the past years. So that's one of the impacts. The important one that I really want to speak on is the loss of consumer trust and confidence. So on one end, you've got the government and the private sector trying to come up with digital solutions. And then just as people are trying to use these services, we've got cyber attackers now are taking these solutions that are supposed to make life simpler and things efficient. So it's a seesaw kind of situation. And the impact of that is that now you have a people that would rather have manual processes in place instead of trusting a digital platform, for instance, because they're afraid to be hacked. On the economy, we've seen a recent report by McAfee that stated that 1% of their GDP was equated to cybercrime costs. So 1 trillion USD has been spent in both crimes that end up taking money from the victims, as well as the victims themselves trying to put measures in place so that the crimes don't happen, be either businesses or on a personal level. And on the economy, we also have a non-financial impact, which is just your loss of reputation. So I don't think a country or a business or an individual would like to be associated with a country that is a frequent victim of cybercrime. So those are the two that I've mentioned for your economy. Now, coming down to the countries, cybercrime adversaries or hackers, as they're known, usually target countries that don't have cyber laws in place. And in legal terms, that would be aiding and abetting. So like I was saying, if you are part of a botnet and then you are taking another network sitting in another country, the possibility of having a lawsuit from that are very high, because then it means you didn't put in measures to protect your infrastructure, and then that infrastructure was used to commit crime in another country. So again, don't ever say you're not a target individual. It's your resources that these people are after. And cybercrime is also a national risk. So I gave an example here of COVID-19. In cybersecurity, we have something called the CIA triad. So this is your confidentiality, integrity, and availability. Most of the time, we'll talk about availability, which means is the system online or has it been brought down? So this part of national security speaks to data integrity. If, for instance, a COVID-19 lab that's very trusted was to be hacked and say your positive results were changed to a negative, imagine the harm that would be done in the country. So you'd have people who are positive walking around thinking they're negative and infecting a lot of people. So these are the very scary things that you could think about when it comes to cybercrime affecting countries. We also have state-sponsored attacks, which Elizabeth spoke lengthy on. It goes back to crippling governments and the services that are put in place. On the positive side of things, now we've got a lot of countries establishing their national sets. We've got more countries collaborating and cooperating, and trying to find a harmonized approach to combating cybersecurity. You could think of the Malabo Convention, for instance, and more countries are now developing legislation that is related to cybercrime and cybersecurity, be your cybercrime bills or your data protection acts, as it has been mentioned before. So what do we do then as countries, as individuals or businesses when we find ourselves in this scenarios? First of all, you need to strategize. You need someone who would head, the whole cyber division and have a vision of what they want to achieve out of it, how the different pieces, including your multi-stakeholder consultation and everything, how they piece together or join together in terms of combating cybercrime. And you need to have a threat landscape. There's no way you'd say you're addressing cybersecurity if you don't know what kind of threats you're facing as a company or as a country. So you do need insights, and some of these insights are free online, and you can even ask for help from different sets that are well established to give you these insights into the digital footprint. Yeah. So we also talk to awareness. People are the heart of cybersecurity, meaning that it's either we're protecting ourselves from people or we're trying to protect people from being attacked and the like. So always engage your end consumers in awareness and collaboration as well. You could have all the tools, you could have all the processes in place, but if you're not collaborating, it would be difficult because, like I have mentioned, some of these attacks go beyond borders. So it's like cross-border type of situation. So you need to establish those collaboration and cooperation agreements. And finally, you need to commit to cybersecurity in your different countries. So we've got something called the Global Cybersecurity Index, which just measures different commitment when it comes to your legal, technical, organizational capacity and cooperation abilities. So from the report that has been published in 2020, we still have difficulty in capacity building and cooperation as well as the technical aspect. That's why it makes sense that most organizations or sets would rely from tools that are based outside the country, or even rely on companies outside the country to deliver capacity. So in a nutshell,
Hi. Thank you. You muted yourself, Angela.
Okay. Am I audible now?
Yes.
Okay, yes. I was saying this is the conclusion of my presentation. I'd like to leave you all with this quote by Robert S. Mueller. He says that there are only two types of companies, those that have been hacked and those that are going to be hacked. So please put measures in place and think of the different impacts if you are not doing anything about cybersecurity. And it's everyone's responsibility, from individual to organizations. We all have a role to play in cybersecurity. Thank you. I will take questions or comments.
Thank you very much, Angela. It was very insightful. You see, that's the other thing. It's becoming very problematic to be online. Everything that we are going to be doing there will be fraught with all kinds of dangerous possibilities coming towards us. So we have come to that part of this particular discussion where we will take a few questions through the chats from people who came to listen to our talk. So if you have any question, please drop it in the chat so that we can pass it on to our panel. Because I was looking for questions and I'm not seeing many for now. So if you have not asked any question, then questions. So maybe I will be the one asking them the very interesting questions here. I've been in the idea that most of these things are a little bit beyond our control in a way. I say, for just the user, what can I do to identify? We all want to download some music and some movies without paying, some of us, I suppose. And when we do that, we find ourselves in funny waters. But should we be particularly worried, knowing that, wow, it's quite innocent and it shouldn't be that bad? Or maybe it's that bad? So I'm just throwing the question out, and I'm hoping that maybe Elizabeth can try to answer that question for us, please.
Please, if you could just go over that question again. I lost you for a few seconds.
Oh, I was saying that I like to go and download a few songs and a few videos, movies without paying. So there's a disclaimer somewhere. So, so I'm saying like some of us would do. So I'm hoping that it is not so bad, unless it is that bad. So how would you tell me whether it's bad or not that bad?
Okay, so there's something we usually say: when something is free on the internet, it's actually not free. You are the product of doing so, right? So when you go to download movies, music, videos, and all that from certain sites that you're not very sure about, like Angela mentioned, sometimes comes with something attached to what you have originally downloaded. Now, this speaks to your hygiene as an individual, right? Talking about how some of these threats affect us as an individual. While this is an individual attempt that hits you directly, it also begs the question of what device were you using to carry out that particular action? What network are you carrying this out on? Is it on your organizational network? Now that widens the impact to go beyond you to now affecting your organization. Now, depending on the organization that you're working with, right, how critical is that particular network that you are on? Now, this widens the scope of the impact. So this just gives us an insight into how a very minor action, I mean, the individual just wants to watch a movie or listen to a particular song or so, but then this shows how this translates beyond you as an individual, affects your organization, affects critical infrastructure if you are in one way connected to critical infrastructure. So this is why we say cybersecurity is a shared responsibility. We see how it trickles from individuals to critical infrastructure. So as much as possible, try to put in place best practices and best measures as we have discussed today.
Yeah, I think I will be worried now. I will stop downloading songs, not always movies, songs. So we have a question for Brensil from Shalen, who is asking what tools and mechanisms are in place in Sub-Saharan Africa that facilitate identification and capture of perpetrators.
Yes, I think that's a very good question. From Charlene. Oh, okay, yeah. So I think when you look at it, I'll just start from organization. So there's organization level, there's the personal level, and then there's the national level. So from a personal level, I really think that a lot of people do not know how to identify and even report such things. But then I think the framework of data protection, cybersecurity laws help to guide people on what how they can report. But one of the challenges that we've had is that people don't know, and even the judiciary and the police don't know how to respond to such issues. But then we are seeing a lot of effort from the organization level. So organizations have now invested in tools and automated tools that can be able to detect who is doing what. And even the investigations that I've done myself, we've been able to identify who used what account to gain access to what system. It helps if you have CCTV cameras, because CCTV cameras will now even give you the physical evidence that this person was there physically. But even if you don't have that, there are tools that we now use to automatically pull this information from systems, from whoever has hacked into systems. In terms of just reporting, if you're like a corporate, you are working with a firm that does forensics, it's easier for you to now report that to the police and then help you. The consulting team will help you to now push the case forward and also enlighten the police on what it is that the case is all about, because they don't understand digital most of the time. However, at national level, and even for the attack that I talked about, where it's very sophisticated and it involves a number of countries, we've seen a lot of help from Interpol and these organizations that are running, not running really, that are operating across different countries. So let's say you're a multinational and you're in different countries. I think that helps that helps you, because now you can be able to identify the same patterns within the different countries. People like Interpol have very good intelligence, and if you don't have links to them, there are organizations that have links to them, so leverage on that. So in terms of infrastructure, there are tools that are there. There are also organizations such as Interpol, police, that can also help you with this.
Thanks. I hope it clarified the question that was asked there. Thanks, Charlene. I'm going to ask that small questions to Dr. Naz. It's about because we are all doing mobile money around here. Around here in Sub-Saharan Africa. When I say we are all, I don't know who has not used mobile money. You know, you send money like you send an SMS. It's just so nice until you send it to the wrong person. So if you want to equate it to must say equate, if you let's say put it in the same framework that you were were discussing just now. How would you assist me using my mobile phone, playing around with money in this case?
Well, it's a bit of a tricky question, but I mean, I think the reality is that you always need to kind of be careful, but double check who you're sending stuff to and what you're sending. So, for example, in the UK, what we find is if you want to transfer money, you get multiple prompts along the way from the banking app, which basically makes you kind of almost like triple confirm that you're sending it to the right person. There's also checks that are done by the app itself or by the bank itself. So typically, for example, with some apps, what they would do is you would need to put in the name of the person you're sending the money to, and then as a first or one of the first steps, the bank or the app would actually look up the account that you're sending money to and try to confirm that the name of the person that you think you're sending money to is actually the name of the person on the account that you're sending money to. So I think it's basically a combined effort that needs to kind of be handled by hopefully kind of the banks and the apps that are allowing the transfer of this money in terms of mobile money, but also kind of people coming back to double checking and triple checking how they're sending money and who they're sending it to. But I think this goes back to one of the just even the more general points of always being concerned about your devices and protecting your devices. So if you're downloading stuff on that device, if you're accessing stuff on that device, if that device is being used for these other purposes, and then you're also using it to send money, to interact with money, to work with your employer, to access work emails, I think we always need to be mindful of this one device can be a massive source of threat itself, and could be the massive source that allows threats or malware or viruses or whatever to be propagated from one network to another, or even in terms of compromising how you send or transfer money and funds.
Do you mean that I should do that I should have 20 phones? One phone for sending emails, one for Instagram, and the other one for mobile money.
I mean, it depends on your risk appetite, right? But I think the reality is that as much as possible, if you're going to have, let's say, one device, I'm definitely not advocating you're going to have 20 phones, but I'm definitely suggesting that you need to be conscious and cognizant of the risks that you're posing to each device that you have. And if personally, for example, if I was using a phone to do a lot of the things that you mentioned, for example, you do need to be mindful that if that phone is compromised, then what impact can it have on the money transfer? Could it be that you think you're sending money to your friend next door, and actually there's malware installed on that device that actually causes the account information to be changed just before you actually press send? I think all of these are things you need to be mindful of, which is why I wouldn't suggest have multiple phones, like I said, but I would suggest being much more careful with respect to the risk you're exposing yourself to.
Thank you.
So you can take away what you want with respect to downloading stuff online.
I would try, but once you finish sending the money, you want to listen to a good tune. So just for motivation purposes. So we have a question still from Shalin, who was asking, which organization in Zimbabwe are using cyber surveillance? That was to Elizabeth, yeah.
I think, yes, that question is for me. So I don't know if you're going to share the slides with participants, but I tried to, in my slides, I put in links to all of these resources where participants can find some more information. I remember when we were prepping for this call, I said I wasn't going to say so much so I don't get into trouble, right? But from Zimbabwe, I know a government organization is known to be using this particular surveillance solution. So please explore the links and resources I have made available in my slides, and I'm glad to answer more questions.
Okay, there is also a question from Priscilla, who is asking, what is the level of awareness of cyber surveillance in Africa?
So there's a question of trust, right? I think that's that's what makes it the big elephant in the room. Who is monitoring me? Why are they monitoring me? What do they want from me, right? Now, understandably, for law enforcement, some level of surveillance is necessary to be able to identify persons of interest, to be able to enforce law to some extent, right? While that is necessary, I'm now taking a look at the surveillance tool by SECO, the Israeli organization. There are cases where this solution has been sold to individuals, right? Political individuals who have personal interest. Now, this also raises the question, as it covers trust issue. So on the part of the citizenry, there's a problem of trust, of the trust element. However, I think it's important that we understand that to an extent there is need for surveillance. However, law enforcement agencies basically should not trample on human rights, so to say. Yeah, I think I would leave it at that. Yes, let me leave it at that. So
Okay,
it basically revolves around the trust, the element of trust. Okay, also let me just go ahead. Talking about international engagements and conversations now. I know at the UN level, right, at the open-ended working group, some conversations were had about the use of IT in surveillance and the likes. And I know one of the key things that was being discussed is the need to preserve human rights, right? When we talk about physical security, we need to consider preserve human rights. When we bring it to the cyberspace also, there is need for us to not trample on human rights. So I think we're still trying to balance this when it comes to the area of cyber diplomacy. It also brings me back to what I said earlier on, how to some extent there is need for us to control who has access to some of these surveillance solutions, because to an extent, I don't think I would be very, I'll raise an eyebrow when I'm aware that law enforcement is carrying out some level of surveillance. But now that I know that individuals who have the purchasing power can also acquire some of this solution, it makes me worried to an extent.
Thank you. Thank you for that answer. I'm going to have one question to Angela about, because she mentioned a particular point which was very, very insightful about cyberbullying and other issues regarding information use in our countries. Don't say our countries, in Sub-Saharan African countries. So, Angela, how do you think that people should be doing to deal with that cyberbullying, fake news, and all these set of things which are, well, they are there now. We can't run away.
Thank you for that question, Laban. So I think it would be very useful to have sort of a framework that is put in place where people can report cyberbullying, even anonymously. Like if you've got a website as a regulator, for instance, of the communication industry, you could have a portal there where, people affected by cyberbullying could report this and have those collaborations with whoever stakeholders are in place, like your police stations, because that's where it gets reported. If it's something that's involving maybe a young child, you could have your UNICEF in place. They always have counselors on standby to deal with the impact of what the individual has went through. So it's not just about going after the adversary themselves, it's also about dealing with the after effects of that cybercrime. So also have that legislation that speaks to how you deal with cybercrime as a country in general. So it has to be stuff that people aren't ashamed that it's happened to them. It has to be as open as possible so that people can be forthcoming about these problems. And that would also give the country or organization insights into the magnitude of the problem, at different levels.
The problem is getting bigger. I've heard news about people doing things in their privacy, and these things are finding their places all over Facebook, and suddenly they can't keep their seat on parliament or whatever other position they are having. So it's becoming very frightening. But I think we will watch that space. There is a question for Brazil from Theophilus, and it is, are we facing a situation where many companies are embarrassed to come out with the problems they are facing, cybersecurity problems they are facing? Brazil?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Are we facing a situation where many companies are embarrassed to come out to talk about the cybersecurity issue they are facing, if they are losing money or other things?
Yeah, I think inevitably, I think that is the situation whereby I think it's also because even when you look at cases that have happened before, when a company is said to have lost money, a lot of people leave the organization, or a lot of people are fired, customers leave. So there's that fear that when people know you've lost money, there'll be a reputational damage that is actually beyond even the money that you have lost. So in a sense, yes, that is something that we have created as a result, where people are not sharing information, and then it's become a hub now for attackers, whereby they can be able to replicate the same attacks across multiple organizations and you never get to know about. I think the good thing is that we are seeing institutions having platforms or opportunities for people to share information. And I think this is one of those platforms whereby you can just, by hearing this is what has happened across different organizations without necessarily knowing the name, helps to share, helps in the information sharing information. But that's a real risk that organizations are facing, lack of information of what's happening to their colleagues and counterparts.
Thanks. There's another question for you. This one from Liz Orembo, and she is asking, what cybersecurity issues are limiting the launch of interbanking products in Kenya, such as PesaLink? And how does this affect financial inclusion?
Okay. So that's very, very specific to Kenya. PesaLink is actually one of a very innovative product where you can be able to send money over about $10,000 within less than a minute. So I think when you look at that, the speed of transactions for that and the risk you face, because when you look at attacks that happen, it's 5 minutes and you've lost about 50,000 USD. So it's a very steep, shaky ground when you start processing those transactions very fast without having the proper infrastructure. So I would say, I think it's just a matter of having the proper infrastructure that will help you to, or that would promote you to have similar platforms operating. And it has to have backup from the regulator, because the regulator is also concerned that people's money is being lost. So the chances of them approving such fast transactions is very minimal. So I think these are some of the issues that are limiting a lot of platforms having such, like PesaLink, spreading across Africa, just because it's very fast. You're transferring a lot of money because it's online. You can't say you have a lot of know your customer KYC, data integrity. So those are some of the issues that I think we are still grappling with. I know there are technologies in the advanced, in the other nations that they have, but I think these are some of the issues that we are grappling with. And of course, I think just to finalize, there's something that we say, we can have very good technology, but if it's sitting on the hands of people who have not been empowered with the right tools, with the right skills, that is now the greatest risk. So it's not that we can't do it. It's also, again, there's a lot of groundwork we need to do for the people, because they are the ones who will be scammed and social engineered out of the money. And now we are talking about 10,000 USD per second. I think that is, we have to really look at what balance are we having between that.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your answer. We have reached the end of our discussion and exchange. So at this point, I will start by thanking everybody that has come, and to our panelists for the many insights. I learned more than I thought I could learn today. So that's, I feel like maybe I grew taller or something. But yeah, so it was very, very good. At this point, to wrap up, I'm going to call on Prof. Shigona to step in and give you the vote of thanks for coming and providing us with so much knowledge. Thank you so much, Prof. Shigona.
Okay, so yes. So thanks a lot for Mindaban for chairing this session and for organizing this session, and the whole team we have been working with, Abisang and others. I'm very grateful to the panelists. So to me, what I thought was, what I found fascinating was the conversation. Kind of, we moved from the micro level, individuals, what do consumers face, kind of went to the meso level, kind of looked at the institutions and organizations and the threats they are facing and how they can mitigate that. And we went to much more macro level, talking about countries and surveillance and things. So kind of like we moved, kind of, I mean, they took us through a journey from the micro to macro level, and from the threats, which kind of sometimes makes you cringe, to the hope. So maybe that was even much more important, that there was kind of like a hope of what can we do to mitigate against this. So for that, I'm very grateful. Again, I'm very grateful for the people who participated, for the attendance. So it will be of no value to us, like if we had these wonderful webinars and wonderful speakers, but then there was nobody to listen to this. I think that's pointless. So we do value the participation, we do value the engagement, because what we want to achieve is the word, I think should have been the hygiene, that if we all are hygienic, or if you're all getting our cyber job, then we have the herd immunity. I presume that. So the more we share, the more we engage, I think the more all of us enriched. So very grateful for both the presenters, the panelists, and the people participated. So I'm looking forward to the next webinar, and looking forward to having the people attending as well. So with those words, I'm wishing you all a wonderful afternoon. Enjoy your day.
Thank you, Prof. Just to let you know, the slides and this video will be available on our website and on our social media platforms. If it's not today, it will be by the end of the week. So if you didn't, or you were supposed to go somewhere and you were not able to listen to us, you might have a chance to catch up. I'm adding to Prof to thank all the panelists. I'm sure we are going to keep the contact, and we will be able to collaborate on plenty of things in the future. And I hope to see you in our next webinar. We are going to talk a bit about cyber diplomacy, and we are going to talk about SADC region and other things. They are all on the pipeline, and will definitely be showing up very soon. So, dear panelists, a last word or goodbye? A last word?
Goodbye.
Thank you very
so
much.
Ellen.
Thank
Goodbye.
you. Goodbye.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you
Thanks,
all.
Angela.
Bye. Yeah.
Thanks. Goodbye. We are at the end. Cheers. Bye. Have a very nice day. See you next time.
Well done.